Welcome to another Sunday masterclass. So I'm working on my garden painting with the urn in the foreground here. And when I asked you what you wanted to see in this painting, you told me several things. One of them was this big tangle of flowers and leaves and shrubbery. And it's very difficult as a beginner to know, what do you put in first and how on earth do you get all of this detail without it looking overdone? Now, I'm going to show you how I do this. There is, of course, more than one way to approach a subject like this. But what I really want you to think about, however you approach this subject, is that your flowers must not be muddied up by the colour green. So therefore, we don't have the luxury like we would in, for example, acrylic painting of going in and putting these red flowers or these purple flowers on top of green, because they'll just end up being very muted by that colour. Red and green are opposites on the spectrum, so the red will neutralise the green and vice versa, and we'll end up with very muddy looking flowers when instead we want bright fresh flowers. We've also got a few little bits of yellow in here. For these very small areas, I may use a little masking fluid, and also for the center of these flowers here. So what I'm probably going to do is start off by putting the pink and red flowers in and the purple flowers. Some of them I will draw, some of them I will just put in with the brush. I'll also probably use some masking fluid to pick out the smaller yellow areas, and that's where we're going to start before we worry about any of the greens which will be put in around the flowers. Now you might think to yourself, I can't paint around all those tiny flowers, Michele. You know what? Even if you end up covering half of them up with the green, you're still going to be left with 50% of them that are bright, clear, fresh colour that went on pure white paper. So about to go in with my masking fluid and just drawing some of these flower shapes here. I'm going to make the ones at the front larger, just getting sort of an idea. Remember that shapes will change, so the ones that are facing upwards might be this shape, or sideways might be this shape, or facing straight forward maybe this shape. You want to make the ones that are down here larger. Am I making an effort to, pinpoint an exact flower and pop him here so identically that his own mother will recognize him? No, I'm absolutely not. I'm just getting a rough idea of what's going on because, friends, life is too short. Once I've done this, I'm going to pop my masking fluid in the centers. So I've drawn lots of these little flowers. I was thinking of reserving some areas for sort of yellow flowers or buds. I'm not quite sure what I can see in there. I think I'll probably just do those with the paintbrush. So I am just using the masking fluid for the centers of flowers. Never have too many flowers in a garden painting. So you see that I'm adding some more as I go along, but by drawing at least some of them, it will help things to look a little bit more realistic. Don't make these centers too small. In other words, don't make them, like a tiny dot like this, because you'll never get any paint into them later. And we're going to be popping some yellow paint in those later on in the picture. And I'm going to carry on and mask out the center of all these flowers. And looking at the picture, although we're going to do some other light areas soon, there's nothing else that I really need to mask out. I'm not, for example, going to mask out those purple flowers on the left of the picture. Even though they're quite small, I just think that they're not particularly hard edged, and I would be better to do those with a paintbrush. Masking fluid leaves incredibly hard edged marks. So it's always important to think about, is that actually appropriate for the thing I'm doing? Dotting a few extra ones in here because why not? But sticking to these areas of having, most of the flowers here, and then a few over this side. Really important to get that natural spacing. So I'm going to start painting these pink and crimson flowers here. I've got my Quinacridone pink and I've got my Alizarin crimson. Now we've got these circles around here, and they aren't indicative of an exact flower shape, but however they look, I won't be trying to remove them until I'm ready to remove the masking fluid, because of course if you take an eraser across this, you are going to pull out the masking fluid at the same time. So coming in here, some of these I'll just be using the pink. I can as well, if I want to, just go a little darker around some of these centers. And even with the flowers that are a much darker red, it's important not to go on so thickly with the paint that you can't see the white of the paper through. So as always, keeping a paper towel or a piece of rag on the side just to lift out if I've gone a little bit too dark. I'm going to work across and paint up all of these lighter flowers. It's so important with your painting, if there are flowers in it, whether that's a vase of flowers on the table or tiny, tiny flowers like these, they must go onto white paper. You simply can't put them on top of green without making them look extremely dull. And remember that these are going to be fairly light compared to some of the darks around them, so don't go too dark with the paint. So at this stage, what I'm doing is I'm removing the masking fluid from the center of these flowers. You can either use your fingers or you can use an eraser. And now I'm going to pop the centers in yellow, and we're not going to have to worry about anything overlapping that yellow and making it muddy. So we need to start layering up over here and blocking in larger areas behind, working light to dark. I've got another big puddle of paint. I'm still working with the yellow and the phthalo blue. It's heavy on the yellow and on the water. I've got a couple of things I want to do over here. So I have got some little plants here that seem to have some sort of very yellow sort of flowers at the top or foliage at the top. So I'm going to pop some of those in. I'm also going to put some background colour just behind here. And I'm going to fade out around the edges with clean water so we don't have to worry about there being some kind of nasty hard edge around here. I'm working with 2 paintbrushes and 2 water jars, so I've got one for applying the paint and one for applying clean water. This just saves all that rinsing and constantly trying to find clean water. I'm going to start out actually by just blocking in some of these lighter areas around here and take them up here. Again, don't leave too many gaps in them because you're going to have to later on figure out how to get around those. So don't make them too small and too gappy, but you want a few gaps just to make it look realistic. So I'm going to put some of these in first. Whilst those are drying, we'll start working around the edges here. I'm going to add some clean water where I need to. And you'll need to work this in stages because if I went around the whole thing, it would dry. Avoid taking the water over the flowers. We're going to paint next to things like this and start bringing in a bit of background colour. Don't panic if you accidentally overlap the odd flower. It's far more important that at least some of your flowers have some nice bright white paper behind them than if you were to try and put them all on top of the green and they'd all be dull and nasty. Don't worry too much about drying lines between areas that you're painting because we're going to have other colours layering on top. So a few lines here and there won't matter, but if you do need to stop, make sure you stop in a place that makes some sense, not some hard straight line in the middle. You can always add a little more clean water and sort of join these areas up later on and see how we've got this soft edge around the outside. So we'll just be able to overlap and layer everything. I'm going to work on this whole area down here, putting some clean water along here and around these edges as I go, all around the bottom here, so that we've got some nice bright greens behind that we can then work our darks on top. Sometimes you need to make decisions as you go along. And I've decided I want to pick out some light stems here in masking fluid. So although areas like this can be tricky, this one I think is particularly difficult because there are so many smaller leaves in here and we might have to have a bit of artistic license and do some of them a little bit larger. But there are also these very light stems against darker areas. So I'm going to put some of those in with some masking fluid. So it's really important that areas like this, if you're putting masking fluid on top of paint, it must be completely dry. Now, I have the advantage that I'm filming and working on multiple things at a time, so often there are even days between the clips that you're looking at. But if this area is at all damp, you mustn't put any masking fluid on it. I'm going to put quite a lot of this on, maybe even some sort of smaller leaf shapes as well, something like this. I think it's really going to help when we come onto the next area. I'm going to stay away from this area over here because we're going to put some mid-greens on this side. So let's look at the outside edge of this area here and these bricks at the front. I'm going to start with an underwash, and although we've got the oxide red to come around the front here, I'm going to start up here with a fairly dark brown, I think. So I'm going to come in here, and again what we're doing is we're blending from both sides. So we're starting with some clean water over here. I'll come down with my sepia because it's really quite dark in this area. Cleaning my brush and now coming much lighter with this red here. I want to avoid hard edges, so if there's anywhere like this that you haven't got time to go to yet, just work in with a little clean water. Sometimes good to have two paintbrushes, so I've got one with clean water here that I can just sweep around here. I'm trying to avoid going over the flowers. Reds and pinks run easily, so we just want to take that clean water around there. Now these are bricks, so we're not going to worry too much about drying lines as long as they are realistic looking. So you don't want, for example, to dry this paint in a strange circle around the flower. But if you get one or two back runs or blooms, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's just going to add a little bit of interest to your bricks. I'm going to continue around here with the Oxide red, blending it out as I get towards the flowers, but not taking water or paint as far as possible across the red and pink flowers. So at this stage, I'm adding in some sort of still quite bright but mid-toned greens. I've got lots of them in this top area here. I'm also going to add some of these spiky ones down here. And what we'll do is we'll just use the brush to kind of take out little spikes. Bearing in mind that you have to go behind these later on. Let me move the board up so you can see. So it's important to keep them fairly blocky, otherwise you're going to have an awful lot of stuff to paint behind. Just using the point of the brush, take things out there. If I want to, I can take a tiny bit of neat phthalo blue on a small paintbrush and just get a little bit of shadow in there. All sorts of advantages to having two paintbrushes on hand. I'm going to put these bright blue-based greens in where I see them, keeping this area around here mostly for some more warm greens. I've introduced some cadmium yellow deep here, and I'm putting in some warmer yellows, mixing with some phthalo blue. I know you'll all be upset with me doing this in the comments, but go for it. It'll rinse off later on. And I'm just going to start putting in some more plants and leaves where I see them, mostly around this area here and around here on the right. I've mixed a bright green now, but it's quite strong. It's sort of a mid-tone, and I'm taking this across in areas, keeping it somewhat dotted, going over the top of the masking fluid, painting around any flowers that I'm near. I can also paint around other areas of foliage that are already in there. If any of that's looking a bit blocky, I can use my paintbrush to just make some negative shapes as well and define things a little bit more. You want to keep these sort of rounded shapes as things like bushes naturally grow in. As I come over to this side, I'll use less of this colour and popping that in like that. I'm going to put a ton of this over this area. I've mixed up some phthalo blue here and some of my buttercup yellow, and I'm going in around these areas, filling in over the top of these light yellow areas, yellow green areas. Don't forget that they will still appear again because we've got masking fluid over them. I'm just taking this in here, and I'm also going to use it if there's any areas of that last green that we put in that just look, you know, a little bit blobby, then I can also use this dark colour just to sort of break up and make a few leaf shapes, getting these real strong dark shadow colours which will allow all of those lighter, brighter colours to shine through. At this stage, my painting's actually dried overnight. I'm going to remove the masking fluid now, so it's really important that you wait until everything is bone dry. You can use your fingers or you can use a firm eraser, and you're just going to use little circle movements like this. Now, occasionally you can find that some of the pigment is lifted. You can always pop a little bit back in, and later on I'll also very carefully take an eraser to remove any pencil marks that were underneath. You'll notice that I applied the dark quite randomly, so it's all over this area here, but I also went a bit up here and a bit over here so that it sort of blends in with other colours and it doesn't look too blocky. But you want to remove your masking fluid as early as possible, and I'm going to take all of this masking fluid off now. I did in the end resort to my Oxford Helix eraser. Be careful when you're doing this because you will spend an awful lot of time sort of feeling to see, just found another bit if there's any left, but it is still possible to smudge dry paint, and you also don't want to get too much oil from your hands on the paper, so be as careful as possible when taking this off. So I hope that seeing me do this in a methodical manner and the way that I approach this large area has helped you with your own paintings. I'll put a picture up so you can see where I am with this painting at the moment. I am going to feature the background area. Some of you were asking me how to approach an area in a background. So that will be coming up probably the week after this one is posted. That will be coming up as a masterclass as well. If you want the full tutorial, then you'll need to wait until the fairly low price mini course is available. When it's ready, I'll put a link to that and links to any other parts of this that are free on YouTube in the video description. I simply can't do a painting of this size and length as a step-by-step on YouTube. I have access to all sorts of statistic and algorithm tools and people just don't watch that stuff. But I hope you've enjoyed this little excerpt and I really hope that it helps you with your own paintings. Do let me know what you think in the comments and what other parts of my paintings or what other sorts of paintings you'd like to see here on YouTube.